Hi folks, and welcome back to Dungeons and Dry Brushing. The video we're going to be doing today is not the video that I originally had planned. On my schedule for today was actually an MDF kit review. I was going to be talking about building MDF terrain and budget-friendly terrain, that kind of thing. But I came in and the Lake Town house model was still sitting at the side of my work desk. I just felt like painting today, so that's what we're going to do. I've primed it up, I've primed up the docks that go with it and the little boat. We're going to do some painting. Now, I am going to be using the airbrush today, which I don't normally do on the channel because I do like to keep things, budget-friendly, focused on that. But this is a Games Workshop kit. There's simply no way to do it budget-friendly. I actually think that this would probably be easier to do with brushes. But I like the airbrush and I barely had a chance to use it yet. So we're going to go make some mistakes on video with that and see how that turns out. I have primed everything in brown, as you can see. I've chosen a brown that I have acrylic paint to match. That way, if anything goes over with the airbrush, it shouldn't be a problem to correct it. Theoretically. Let's get started. I've decided on a red and blue color scheme for the building, so I'm starting with Blood Angel's red through the airbrush. I'm going to do my best not to overspray onto the exposed beams and things like that, but I'm honestly a total novice with the airbrush, so it's absolutely going to happen. That's alright though. That's the point of practice like this, is to get some experience, correct some mistakes, and get better with it. Once it's base coated, I get out the darker Flesh Terrors red and I spray that into the corners of the bright red and any place where the edges meet and along them. This is just to add a bit of visual interest and variety, as well as the first step in the weathering process, the start of making it look like this is a really old paint job instead of a really fresh paint job. As you can see, there's a lot of overspray and my accuracy with the brush isn't very good yet. But that's why I'm practicing. It's alright to be bad at certain techniques, especially ones you don't have much experience with, but try not to let it keep you from learning. The contrast paints do seem to be an excellent choice for using with the airbrush too. They're high pigment and they're already thin enough to be used straight out of the pot. I ended up choosing Croxagore scale contrast for the blue shingled panels. Again, there's a lot of overspray here, even onto the red sections. Though I do my best to cover it up afterwards with the original colors, and honestly, by the time all of the weathering is done on this rundown fishing hut, I don't think it's very noticeable. The next step is Basilicanum Gray for the shingles. I know that the brown is showing through a little as the backing on all these colors, but that's alright. At the end of the day, I want this to look like painted wood. I'm actually going to do a few things to enhance that effect later on. With the base coats done, it's time to touch up mistakes and overspray. This is why it's so important to have a matching brown paint. I take that color, leather brown from Army Painter, and just go over all of the wooden beams again. I also take this chance to touch up the red where the blue oversprayed onto it. This is kind of a tedious process, and there would be less of it to do if I had applied the contrast paints by brush in the first place, but that's okay. I just put on a podcast or stream a TV show and work through it. For the outbuilding, I'll be using more or less the same process, except all of the paints are applied to the brush. Mostly because I'd already cleaned the airbrush at this point, but also just to show that it makes no real difference in the finished outcome. The paint I'm using here is called Creed Camo, and it's also a contrast paint. While that dries, I'm going to do the next step in weathering the main building. I take a small piece of sponge and dip it into the leather brown color I'm using as bare wood. I brush most of the paint off on a paper towel and then dab it randomly around the red panels of the building. You want to do this step before you dry brush. The order of operations on this one is actually pretty important. The blue panels get a rough dry brush next. It's just their original color mixed with a bit of acrylic white. Then, finally, everything gets a dry brush of Drake Tooth as well. This is for the red panels, the beams, the blue panels, the shingles, all of it. Now this may look too bright at first, and that's fair, but we're going to be knocking this down later with a wash. I know for new painters this part is always a bit nerve-wracking, but you have to remember it's just paint. You can always paint over it if you hate it. Good painters aren't defined by never making a mistake, but rather by how they work with their mistakes and by being daring enough to make them in the first place. Yeah, everyone say hi to my cat. All of the window panes get filled in with Vallejo's Dark Sea Blue next. I like this color for windows personally. It's dusky without actually being truly dark. Then it's time for a wash. I use Nuln Oil over the entire building and outbuilding. But to be honest, this is a mistake. I should have used an oil wash. The Nuln Oil on this big of a scale just stains things too much. I regret using it, even if the finished result isn't too bad. I've also painted the docks for the set in the same style, though with much less work involved. They just get primed brown, Drake Tooth dry brush, and then a wash. Though for the washes on the docks, I start with Army Painter's Strong Tone, and then I use their green tone around the edges and the supports to give the impression of algae or moss. Once that's done, it's on to detail work. All of the nets, ropes, chains, and other decorative parts. They don't all use the same colors, but they do all get more or less the same treatment. A base coat followed by either a dry brush and a wash or a contrast paint. The exceptions are the metal pieces, which all get coated with Vallejo's Air Color Aluminum and then washed with Nuln Oil. For some people, picking out all of these little details may not be the most exciting part, but try to be patient. It's these small things that will make the building pop and look good on the table later. I also blacken the window frames at this point. The only detail I don't really make an effort to finish here is the sign, and that's largely because I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do with it yet. I may come back later and do some freehand on it once I've come up with a logo. And once the details have been touched up, that more or less brings us to the finished product. Okay guys, so that about wraps it up for this one. Personally, I think it turned out pretty good. One of the great things about these Games Workshop kits is the deeply ingrained textures. It's really hard to go wrong with a base coat, dry brush, and wash system with textures like that, which is one of the best parts of their products. Alternately, of course, contrast paints, they work in pretty much the same way. I do think that my criticism from the original review still stands. There's no way that this should be a $60 kit, but it is what it is. It does look great when it's finished though, so it has that going for it. And I think it's a great start to like a tiny fishing town, peaceful little village scene, or maybe a not so peaceful one. This kit may have turned out a little better if I had used just contrast paints, just brushed them on instead of using the airbrush, that is. But I felt like using the airbrush, I felt like practicing, and sometimes the key to being productive in your hobby time is doing what you're passionate about when you're passionate about it. Strike when the iron is hot, instead of thinking about the project forever, letting it get too big in your mind and then never doing it. You feel like doing a thing on a particular day and you have the time, just do it, and do it the way you feel like doing it. Don't necessarily go too overboard overthinking it. Any of those techniques would have worked. This one turned out fine, even if I'm far less than expert with the airbrush, but the end product's still pretty good, I think. So if you could like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, there's definitely more on the way. Leave a comment if there's anything you want to let me know, or requests for future videos if you want to see more or less of things like this. I'll see you on the next one.